You are joining us on the last day of No More Week, and my name is Katie Yates. I am the campaign director for Washington Says No More. We are very excited to join the No More Foundation on the global dialogue about domestic and sexual violence. Today, we have Representative Tina Orwall, who is the representative for the 33rd District in Washington State. Thank you, Tina, for joining us. And then we also have survivor Leah Griffin, who's been working on being an activist since 2014. And we're going to have a very important discussion about an update on the bill initiatives, the rape kit backlog for Washington State, and many more other different topics we'd love to address today. So thank you for joining us. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. So happy to be here.
Good, good. We're happy to have you. So first thing I'd love to address is, how did Tina, you and Leah connect about this?
You know, we've been working together so long, and we couldn't have done the work that we've done in Washington without Leah. You know, back in 2015, I'd been touring evidence rooms and I'd seen these white boxes stacked to the ceiling, and I found out they were sexual assault kits, and most had not been tested. And for me, that was all these survivors whose voice wasn't heard, who never got justice. And as I started working on it and it started getting coverage, I got this email from Leah Griffin, and she identified herself as a survivor. And we met for coffee. And, you know, what struck me is this is one of the darkest, most difficult moments in her life. And when she spoke to me, she said, she didn't make it about her. She said, how do we fix the system so this never happens to anyone? Because the system had failed her every step of the way. So Leah and I really partnered up, and we've really been trying to create that system that really supports survivors.
What I would like to say is, after my assault, I encountered systematic errors at every single point. I had a hospital that turned me away because they didn't provide rape kits. The police barely investigated. They refused to test my rape kit or do a toxicology report. The prosecutors were victim blaming and really harmful. Everything about the process was broken. And that email that Representative Orwall received, I sent to every single lawmaker in the entire state. I sent it to all of our state and federal representatives, city council, county council, any person that I thought could make a difference, I sent that email to. And Tina Orwall was one of maybe 3 people that responded to that email. And I think it's important to have advocates that are out there doing the work, but it's so important to have champions in positions of power that are also willing to do this work. And I think that's why we need more women in power. This is why we need more people of color in positions of power, because it takes somebody who cares about all of the problems to solve all of the problems.
Exactly. That's great. Tina, we've been discussing a few things over the years in our partnership. And one of the big issues that we've been trying to address is the backlog in Washington State with the rape kits. When we got together to examine some of the testing in 2018, there is discussion of tracking of these kits. And that was actually released about a year ago officially to the public. How is that going? What's the progress? Can you give us an update on that?
Yes, absolutely. And I want to start by thanking you, because you've been such an important partner, and the steps we've taken, you've been there every step of the way. So I want to say thank you. And, you know, we had 10,000 untested kits. Mm-hmm. And again, those represent people that the system failed. And one of the things that the legislature we've done, and one of the things I'd say is it's been very bipartisan. It's been an incredible team of people working together on both sides of the aisle, is that we did set up a tracking system. Mm-hmm. So every survivor can go online and check the status of the kits as we're moving forward. We also have our Attorney General's office, who got a SACI grant, which is a federal grant, and they helped us with the inventory to understand all the kits we had not tested. And so our State Patrol Lab has been amazing. We've given them additional resources, and they've also been working with private labs. And so by mid-2022, all of the 10,000 sexual assault kits will be tested.
Wow.
And I know, and we we funded a high throughput lab in Vancouver, Washington.
Right.
And so starting mid 2022, every sexual assault kit will be tested within 45 days. And right now it's taking sometimes 1 or 2 years. So we really, as far as a system, we are really fixing that part of the system. So we'll never, ever have a backlog again.
Good. Good.
I have another fun number. You were talking about the number of untested kits. The tracking system is a huge deal. We are the first in the country to have a tracking system. So it's really, bleeding edge technology and systems. This is important to track the evidence, of course, so that the police and the hospitals know where everything is, but it's also important because law enforcement isn't always responsive to survivors. And that was one of the problems that I encountered, and it's something that I hear from survivors all of the time. And I actually just got the statistic from the Attorney General's office because I was trying to send it to another state. Since we've installed our tracking system, we've had 4,955 unique survivor logins. So not only is this the first tracking system in the country, but it's being used for its intended purpose. And that's almost 5,000 survivors who know the status of their evidence that they produced. And that is a huge deal when we're talking about survivor mental health and taking back control over their lives and this process.
I think the other thing to let you know, and our Attorney General is tracking this, is so after they test the kits, they're uploaded into the CODA system, which is the federal system that connects cases all across the country. And since they've loaded up, I think there are about 6,000 that have been loaded up so far, they've had 600 hits to other cases. And they've started identifying offenders have multiple offenses. In my area, where I'm in South King County this year, they had an offender that linked to a brutal sexual assault in Burien, who also was linked to a homicide in Federal Way. And again, we're seeing law enforcement reinvestigate and prosecutors prosecuting these cases. There was another one, the last name is Leah, who was identified with a number of kidnapping and sexual assaults, and he was linked to 3 different counties, and he's currently being sentenced for those crimes. So, in addition to, making sure voices are heard, we're really seeing justice to some of the most dangerous predators in our state.
Right. And that brings us to how you began to investigate the rape kit backlog. This was inspired by a documentary, wasn't it?
Yes. Yeah, the Joyful Heart Foundation has been extraordinary. And, also other states. It was a national issue, is something I learned really quickly. And I reached out to Detroit. I reached out to Houston. I reached out to Ohio. In fact, one of the prosecutors in Ohio, he actually jumped on a plane and testified on my first bill, and he never charged us. He wanted to make sure we found justice in our state. So it really has been this incredible, national effort. And the Joyful Heart Foundation really has been leaders on what best practices are. Their documentary, we actually show that to the Vancouver Lab, and they were just so moved by it. And they really just said it gave them a whole new meaning for doing this work. So again, I think that documentary they did really focus on Detroit and the incredible work they've been doing there.
In the documentary, so our viewers know, it's called I Am Evidence. And that is actually a documentary that we've played at some of our conferences as well. And Representative Tina Orwall has actually joined us in discussion after the documentary has been shown. So if you have not seen that documentary, I highly, highly recommend it. It's chilling, but it's necessary. It's a conversation that needs to happen, which has led to this conversation with both of you today. So Leah, you have been a survivor, you are a survivor, but you have turned that into becoming an activist for all survivors. You worked with Senator Patty, right? Senator Patty Murray?
Yes.
And how was that? How did that spark more conversation from there?
Well, when I said that Representative Orwall was the only state legislator that got back to me, Senator Murray also was one of the very few people that read my email and wanted to make change. The part of my personal story that she really resonated with was that I had been turned away from a hospital because that hospital did not have sexual assault nurse examiners, which are the specially trained nurses that collect the evidence. I was aghast because I thought, you're raped, you go to the hospital and you get a rape kit done. That's what you do, right? And it had never occurred to me that every hospital, every emergency room wouldn't have the ability to help sexual assault survivors. We later found out through the International Association of Forensic Nurses that only about 20% of hospitals in the United States have 24-hour access to SANE nurses. Patty Murray asked for a government accountability report, and that report is really the largest study ever done of SANE nurses in the United States in 2015. And it found that this is a problem nationwide in every state, that there are entire counties, sometimes dozens of counties in some states that have no SANE nurses. Survivors are routinely driving hundreds of miles in order to access care. Sometimes this means crossing county lines or even crossing state lines, which creates a lot of jurisdictional problems then with solving the case. There are also examples of survivors in the northern villages of Alaska having to take 2 airplane rides over 17 hours in order to be able to collect evidence. So we really have a nationwide crisis when it comes to SANE nursing. There aren't enough of them. Hospitals don't want to have them because it's a costly program. SANE nurses don't make the hospitals money. So we've been working for the last 5 years on the Survivors Access to Supportive Care Act, which is a federal bill that will, very much like Rep. Orwall leads, create a task force in order to bring people to the table and really solve this problem. It also creates a huge grant funding program so that we can train more nurses, and then professional development so that we can retain the nurses that we have, because burnout is a huge problem with this field, as you can understand. It wasn't easy to pass legislation during the Trump era. So we are actually hoping to refile the bill by April 1st in order to talk about it for Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And the federal bill is bipartisan. We've got Lisa Murkowski from the Senate, who's one of the prime sponsors. And I really think that we've got a shot at getting it passed this year. And this will be really the beginning of solving this problem. That needs to be taken care of.
Wow, that's fantastic. And we actually have a couple bills in the works and being worked on passing in Washington State. Representative Tina Orwall, can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, we have House Bill 1109, which we passed out of the House and will be heard soon in the Senate. And there's 3 pieces I would talk about that's in that bill. The first is, we know it's not enough just to test the kids, right? We want them re-investigated and potentially prosecuted. And so we do have a system set up through the police chief and sheriffs and the AG's office to find out what happened. We need to know. The public has a right to know. Survivors have a right to know what happened as far as testing and investigating. And so that's one portion of the bill. The second portion of the bill, and I may have Leah speak more to this, is around a survivor bill of rights. Really basic things: the right to an interpreter, the right to information shared about your case. But I'll let her maybe speak more to that. The third component I really want to mention, one of the things I'm really excited about in our state, and we started this a couple years ago, is we have trauma-informed training for police officers. And it's done through the Washington State Criminal Justice Commission, which is actually in my district. I've attended some of it pre and COVID and post-COVID, and they have law enforcement from all over the state, and they teach them about the neurobiology of trauma, survivors speak, they learn about best practices of how to investigate. And when I first attended one of them, and there was about 30 officers in the room, they had their arms crossed, like they didn't want to be there. And by the third day, I heard officers saying, I wish I would have known this. Like I would have been doing everything different. So it's been really powerful
Right.
And so one of the things we actually have tied to this training is a case review. And I don't know if Antoinette is with us today. She's really helped lead this in our state with the commission. And so we're going into jurisdictions, and we started in Bellingham and reviewing actually case files. Are they using the new skills? What are the gaps in training that we still need to address? So it's been this great way of continuing to learn and continuing to train officers. And so again, we want to expand that program. And so part of the bill is to expand it. It's also going to be looking at race and ethnicity. That's not something that I think has been done in our country really to see, is there a different path to justice? And I do think our friends in Detroit have found some information about this, but we need to understand which cases are being investigated. Right. And what additional training may be needed.
Representative Orwell, this is Michelle Bart, president of the National Women's Coalition Against Violence and Exploitation. Thank you both for yourself and Leah for being with us today. There has been a question in regards to the policing matter with the backlog of rape kits. Do you know the statistics of how many kits that have been backlogged due to bias investigations?
We don't. That's what we got to find out. But I think where this question is a little leading is talking about the backlog as a backlog, right? And I actually really don't like the term backlog because it's not a backlog. Like, a backlog suggests that they were going to get there eventually and just didn't have the resources or time to do all of them. None of these were backlogged kits. All of these were kits where an officer made a decision to not use this investigative tool to further an investigation. So was there bias in that? Absolutely. Will we find that as we start looking at what kits are available and the statistics behind how these cases open back up? We absolutely will. I think there's also bias in whose kits exist in the first place, because for a long time, if you got a rape kit done at a hospital or sexual assault kit, those were only kept if there was a police report filed. And not everybody is able to approach the police in the same way. As a white woman, I was totally comfortable filing a police report, but other women or other people of color and LGBTQ people or trans people may not be as comfortable encountering the police.
Or human trafficking.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we're going to see those biases play out in the statistics we gather for sure.
So to piggyback on that question, from a question now from me, we did train, like Representative Orwell stated, Washington State investigation lab down here in Vancouver. We showed them the I Am Evidence film. We did a walkthrough, and I learned that we're limited, first of all, on researchers and investigators from Washington State. I think at the time we only had like 2 or 3. Are we growing that number with our efforts? And on another end of that, when they go back to the police investigators on a case because they're missing stuff in the kits, I found it alarming that the delay process between their ask and the receiving the information that they requested takes a lot of time. If the case is closed by the police standards and they have everything that they needed and something was missing, why does it take so long to get back so that they can finish the testing of the kit?
Yeah, and thank you, Michelle. That's a great question. And thank you for your leadership and the work you did with the Vancouver Lab. It's incredible. And I think their perspectives and their dedication to this work has only grown from your intervention. You've asked a lot of important questions. The one thing I would tell you is not this session, but the previous one, we did give the police chief and sheriffs $2.5 million to help in investigations. And of course, then COVID hit. And so part of what they're saying is they haven't really used much of those resources yet. They also talk about a shortage of law enforcement and investigators. But what I can tell you is that the Attorney General has hired investigators as part of their SAKI grant. And so every time the lab has a CODIS hit, they review it. And that's how they've linked it to multiple jurisdictions. And what they've been doing is they've been calling law enforcement, checking on the case, letting them know, there's a case not only in King County, but in Snohomish County and Spokane, so that they can link those cases. And so we have more work to be done on this. We certainly have given resources for this. And I think the data we're asking for in this bill, which I'm getting a lot of pushback on, is we want to know what happened. And we want them to know we're going to be reviewing what happened and that we do expect them to be reinvestigated and, action taken if possible. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned that Leah has a little more information on the survivor rights bill. Leah, could you discuss that a little more?
Yeah, we've really been working on survivors' rights consistently for the last several years. There really wasn't a lot when we first started doing this work, and we keep learning more and more and finding other things that we need to make sure we enshrine into law so that people are protected. And this session, the right to interpreter is like, and of course, like that should have been earlier. The other thing that I really appreciate about the right we're adding is the right to have timely information about the progress of your case. And I remember early on, having my phone with me constantly all the time, waiting for an investigator to call, thinking that they were going to be calling soon, and then not hearing for weeks and weeks and weeks, and having no context for what was going to happen. These investigations take a really long time, and I don't think a lot of survivors realize that when they first start with the process. So having timely information is important, and we're going to pass those this year. And I think there's a few more that I would love to see. I would love to see survivors have the right to standing in court. A lot of people don't realize that nobody really represents the victim of crime. The state, the prosecutors represent the state and the interests of the state, and the defendant has the right to an attorney. But the victim really doesn't have standing in court. They don't have a lot of rights when it comes to the actual courtroom. So hopefully we can improve that situation. There are also sometimes warrants issued to survivors, where if the prosecutor is worried that a survivor will not show up to court to testify, they can actually arrest and detain survivors of sexual assault in order to compel testimony. And that's another thing that I hope we can get fixed pretty soon.
Leah, I'd like to piggyback on that. I just did an interview, it didn't air, but with Coin CBS here in Portland, regarding a man that got charged with 35 counts of human trafficking, sexual assault, etc. He was indicted by a grand jury, and Coin called asking for survivors because the DA's office was. And after an hour of this interview, I found myself as a survivor of rape, and possibly at some point NWCAVE will take this position. I believe survivors of sexual assault, domestic violence, any kind of crime, human trafficking, etc., should not have to be forced to make a prosecutor's case. An individual, if they have the evidence on a case, a survivor, if they want to testify, should be their choice. But in the time of Zoom, which we've all become really acclimated to in the last year, survivors should be able to testify via video, so that they don't have to face that abuser, trafficker, rapist ever again, unless they wanted to. By re-victimizing the victim, I don't see where justice comes down the pipe in a case to watch a rapist get off for 1 year behind bars or has to pay a fine. I believe that we need to do better not only in Washington, but all across this country, that survivors should not have to be put on exposure again just to exploit the exploited to make a case. Prosecutors and detectives do their job. If they do it well, the evidence should speak for itself. Just my platform there.
Yeah, and Michelle, I strongly agree with that. The one thing in my bill is around underage or minors having the right to do testimony via video. There's also a Representative Goodman bill, which is looking at the issue around domestic violence and sexual assault survivors and the ability to do video testimony. So I think you're right on target, and I think we should be doing everything we can to empower people who have, been subject to these horrific actions. The other thing I would say about our Survivor Bill of Rights is we do have a right of action. I think we're the only one in the country, whereas if you think your rights have been violated or not upheld, that you can go to court. But I agree with Leah, we got to keep strengthening that.
Definitely. And Katie, we have Antoinette that's joined us. And I have to say, without Antoinette, as much as I love you two, I get so much from her with all her tags of NWCAVE and Washington Says No More almost 5 times a day. It keeps us updated. So it's almost like that she works for us. So I love it. So she is on the call. Huh?
With all of us.
So she is on, she is here. So I'm going to, if you don't mind, may I add her as a panelist so that she can, okay, Antoinette.
Do.
You asked, so we're clicking in. Can you hear us?
I see she's muted.
Okay. Okay.
Antoinette has been with us every step of the way. And again, you're right. She's just a rock star advocate.
She really is.
Good
morning, Antoinette.
Good morning. Hi. Thank you so much for including me. I've been listening to the panelists, and I just wanted to, add a little bit to what Representative Orwall said regarding our case review program. I think one of the important things that the case review program will do is help us determine why victims are dropping out of the law enforcement process. Mm-hmm. I think that's a really critical issue for us to be looking at, because if we can make some determinations as to why victims are dropping out of the process, we can improve law enforcement training and I'm hoping eventually prosecutorial training. And with respect to the prosecutorial training, we're looking at case files, law enforcement case files, but we're also looking at prosecutorial case files. So we can get a clear picture from beginning to end as to where in that process, a victim, dropped out, where there are problems in how the victim was treated during that process, and how we can better inform the process in terms of training. We're going to be the first. We are the first jurisdiction in the nation to be doing this, looking at not only the law enforcement case files, but also the prosecutorial case files. And I think that's really critical, because you can't really get a complete picture of how that process affects a victim unless you're looking at the entire investigatory process from beginning to end. And we're to that end also we're looking at how the law enforcement and prosecutorial process treats different ethnicities, different rate of victims of race, and how we can better improve training to better inform how we approach different marginalized groups of victims. For instance, in Seattle, we have an epidemic of sexual violence against Indigenous women, and those cases are not being investigated. we need to find out why those cases aren't being investigated. And if it's if it involves that the victims aren't coming forward or they're dropping out of the law enforcement process, we need to know why that is and how we can better improve our training to let victims know that they can be safe in approaching law enforcement and prosecutors with their stories. I think that the information that we're going to glean from the case review program is going to be invaluable in going forward to better improve how victims are treated by law enforcement and prosecutors. And I'm very excited about it.
And I want to thank you, Antoinette, for that work, because I know you research case reviews all over the country, and you really helped us create one. And I think it is really unique that it's tied to the commission and to training, and so that we're continually improving our training and our system along the way. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and again, I mean, we are the only state that is doing this. So we really are leading the way. And I just want to thank Representative Orwall for being our champion in this, because none of this would be happening without her. And she really is a model for what our elected representatives can do for us, in this time where a lot of people are, question what our elected officials do in terms of helping individuals in their jurisdictions. And she really has been a champion for us.
Well, thank you. It's been a credible team effort. And of course, so many of the team is here today. I also want to recognize Representative Mossbrucker, who's a Republican from Eastern Washington, as well as Senator Dingra, who's part of our champion. And one of the early champions was at the time Senator Pramila Jayapal, who's now in Congress and continues to help us in Congress. So thank you for those kind words.
You're welcome. And also this is a bipartisan effort, and I think that's a remarkable thing for us to be proud of in Washington State.
Definitely. And Katie, I just wanted to add, we have a couple people that have called in, so they can't see the chat. I just want to let everyone know, if you want to find out what's going on in your state, go to endthebacklog.org and then / and then put your state. I know we have folks on the line today from Texas and Florida and California and Washington State. So thank you all for joining us.
So Representative Orwall, I would love to know, what can advocates and those who are not in the industry do to help with the progress of these bills and bringing more advocacy for survivors? What can we do to help this happen?
Yes, thank you for that question. It really, so much of the movement of all bills is because people reach out. They share their stories. They reach out to their legislators or to the governor to let them know this is important. And of course, we've seen Leah and Nicole and a number of survivors really testifying and helping out. So if someone's out there is listening in Washington State, there's an 1-800 number, and maybe we could put that number on the screen, but they could reach out to their legislators and say, please support House Bill 1109. And please make sure there's funding, right, to investigate and to make sure there's justice whenever for survivors.
I think it's really important for people to realize that their legislators are real people. That I think that a lot of people have this concept of government, but being this big separate entity. But in reality, government is our neighbors and people that can become our friends. And reaching out and telling your story isn't this obscure process. It's just human beings having a conversation. And that connection and that storytelling is how change is made in government. That's what government is people talking to each other and listening and trying to solve problems together. It's not a big mystery. It's just people working with other people.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely that limiting factor that I think for survivors specifically to get the courage to share their story. And you mentioned the number for anyone to call. Is there a little more protection for survivors if they want to anonymously share their story so that it inspires the bill or bringing it to the floor? Is there a protection for survivors?
I think when they call, they can ask that their name or address not be shared.
Okay.
And I think that is important. And, we try to be very sensitive to that. I know in some cases we've had people call in where they don't identify who they are because they're worried about that. And we want to keep everybody safe. And the other thing that Leah and I have been working on with Representative Mossbrucker is when we get through this year and we have the testing complete, we want to do a public response campaign. We want to apologize. I want to apologize to every survivor that the state failed them. And we want them to let them know that we are fixing it and that we will be responsive so that they feel that they can reach out. And so I think there's a lot of healing that needs to happen. But a forum like this is part of that. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you for the light you're shining on this.
Representative Orwell, we have a private question in regards to current rapes. What makes them different on their rape kits versus the backlog of rape kits? Who gets tested first?
Well, right now, what we did, and we worked with the unions, is that the older kits are being tested by private labs, and there's 3 of them. And so all of those are sent out. The current sexual assault kits are all tested within the state with our own public labs, and there's several in the state. And so right now it's taking anywhere from, I think, 3 months to a year or longer to test new cases. And so that's when that high throughput lab, which is up and running, and there's an awesome video of it, by mid 2022, every new sexual assault kit will be tested within 45 days or less. And
I
so
think the number actually was 14 months was the average amount of time that a rape kit was taking. Mine took over a year, and with incredible pressure on lawmakers or on police to do it. But 14 months was the average for a new kit.
And that's got to impact their ability to prosecute, and so by having it really within, a month and a half or less, that's really going to help prosecutors be able to move forward more rapidly.
And it's also a big deal for survivor mental health because, a lot of survivors, you're waiting for this process in order to heal. And, going over testimony in your mind and being ready to testify and go to trial. And the waiting is really detrimental. So, waiting 14 months for the most basic evidence to come back is not healthy or right. And this bill that we passed a couple of years ago mandates that we get it down to 45 days, which is incredible.
Since this will be uploaded for the public to watch, I also want to be an advocate. Media does matter, but not when you re-victimize the victims. And I'm a media consultant by day. So for me, when I have to sit down with a survivor of any kind of crime and say, the media has come calling, would you like to tell your story? Would you like to be interviewed? More times than not, they cancel at the last minute. Mm-hmm. I have to ask if the media listens to this, that take into consideration when you're asking someone to tell their story, to relive their nightmare, that canceling them, you've just re-victimized them again, even though that they're not going to be seen or heard from. So I encourage all members of the media, reporters, journalists, assignment desks, to please, unless the country's burning down, there is no real big emergency to pull a reporter from telling the story that they just took from an individual.
Thank you.
So for testing rape kits, I think it's important we kind of break it down a little more on the process. And Michelle mentioned this a little earlier. When we did a tour of the Vancouver clinic of how the process begins, they did mention that there was a lack of examiners because there's a specific title that they need in order to test these kits. Can you go a little more on, Representative Tina Orwall, can you go a little more about what this position entails and I know you mentioned earlier that we don't have the exact numbers of how many we've hired, but that was some of the funding that was necessary to hire that position. I think it'd be great if we talk about what that position is, and so others might want to pursue it, or
Absolutely. And that's a great question. And one of the backdrops I would tell you is that Captain Alexander and I, who at the time was at the State Patrol, now she's at the Commission, we flew to Ohio. We flew to look at their labs, and because they were doing it, I think within 30 days. And so what we learned is that there's not only is it how many staff you hire, but it's what are the best practices and what technology do you have. And so we really came back and started meeting with our lab to really address all three. And so I think we've hired since we've started, I think almost 30 staff to work on sexual assault kits. But I think specifically in the Vancouver lab, it was 12 additional staff. They have this new technology that allows a lot of the early batch work to be done by machine, which frees up their very skilled staff to be reviewing cases and doing things like CODIS uploads. And so that's one of the tools that they have to actually do it more quickly. So again, I think the lab is really making sure that they've hired very qualified staff and that they're freed up to do the more intensive work around the reviews and uploads, which again, that's a great question. Thank you.
Good, good. Leah, can you tell us a little bit about your personal experience that you mentioned earlier that inspired you to make sure this is an initiative that you fight for survivors to make sure their kit is examined properly?
Well, I think that, I'd grown up watching SVU, and you think that, you get raped and then Mariska Hargitay shows up and guides you through this process, and then they catch the bad guy and everyone's safe. And that is not at all what the system looks like. We have a system with so many problems, with so many gaps, that it really was not functioning. And I think we're getting closer step by step to a more functioning system, but really there's a long way to go. And when I encountered this system, I couldn't believe how bad it was. I am aware of my privilege in this situation and understood that if I, as a white middle class person with access to the internet, access to transportation, access to a support system, no children, with a job that will let me take time off to deal with this, if I'm a professional librarian, like I can find information. If I can't manage this process, then nobody can manage this process. It's unmanageable. And I just couldn't move on and have this continue to persist, knowing that I could do something to change it. And that's been really my motivation the last 5 years, is this just can't be. And I'm going to do everything that I can to educate people on the problem, to work with lawmakers to get it solved, to work with all sorts of entities to fix these problems. I'm really excited right now. I'm also working with some members of the King County Council to hopefully get this 2-hour abridged training that that they've worked on trauma-informed training to all officers in King County. So really, we've taken the state bill that just looks at training investigators, and I'm hoping that we can get all officers trained on a little bit of trauma-informed, because often survivors' first interaction with law enforcement isn't with an investigator, it's with a patrol officer. And if we want that interaction to be positive, then those officers need to be trained so that they're not re-traumatizing and victim blaming. And so hopefully we'll get that rolling out pretty soon.
Yeah, there's so many steps I think a lot of people don't understand before you actually get to the rape kit process. And what I learned back in 2018 after the tour is that any possible missteps can lead to not even getting the rape kit properly tested. And I think that's so necessary for people to understand that it doesn't have to get to that process for something to go wrong. Mm-hmm. And that there's multiple steps as well when it comes to examining a rape kit. And Representative Tina Orwall, can you talk a little bit about the steps that are necessary to get your kit tested, and as well as tracking now that that is available?
Absolutely. And, when they were looking at the older untested kits, what they found is sometimes the paperwork hadn't been done, right? Something as simple as paperwork that has to be done when the kit's submitted. It was things like how it was stored. The DNA wasn't intact enough to be tested. And so you're right, there's things where when we look at these 10,000 untested kits, we weren't able to test them all for those reasons. And so, I think that's why this new system, the tracking system, has a scan bar starting in the hospital, going to law enforcement, going to the prosecutor, where they have to scan in, right? And so they'll know somebody's tracking. They know that they better get their paperwork done. They know they better store that and retain it, because we have laws now. That's part of our work, is to retain this for like 30 to 50 years, right? So again, a lot of those steps where things were missing, things were destroyed, should not happen again. Or if they do, we will know from the tracking system.
Exactly. When that was in discussion back in 2018, that was huge for us to even get a tracking system going, because that protects our survivors and that holds accountability to everyone involved. Because so many times, like Leah mentioned, survivors don't know what's happening. They don't know what's going on with their kid. They don't even know if they're being listened to. And that is so difficult. And as you mentioned earlier, there's a certain amount of days that it takes to even get to a process, if they get to it. And so having this tracking system, which is huge for Washington State to lead on, it's really put us to help survivors in a bigger way than we ever have. And that's amazing. I'm very thankful to you and the rest of the team for creating that system. It's big. It's big.
Thank you. And I noticed someone, maybe it was Michelle, just put in the AG's number. They
Yes.
have a phone number that can be called by a survivor if they do want to check the status or find out more information. And I would just say we have an amazing Attorney General who's really, this is one of his priorities, and his staff have done such great work, not only to set up resources on their website, but to make sure every time there's a hit that's what's happening, and they've helped on the victim notification. Like, how do you notify someone after 5 or 10 years? You need to do it in a way that's very sensitive and not re-traumatizing. So they've been helping on those protocols and really helping along the way. So,
Katie, for the purpose of those that will be watching this later, I just wanted to mention the National Sexual Assault Hotline phone number. It's the national one, so depending on the state you're in, they can direct you to your resources. It's 1-800-656-4673. And you can also get more information at our partners at RAINN, www.rainn.org. Those are the national. We also have task force here under the Attorney General. You can visit atg.wa.gov for the task force. There's a couple sexual assault task force that Representative Orwell had mentioned early on. And you can also visit us at nwcave.org/help for a list of national resources. Back to you, Katie.
And if you are in Washington State watching this, we do have resources on our website, wasaysnomore.org, and we have it broken down by county as well. So that will narrow it down locally in Washington State. Go ahead.
I was going to say, and people can feel free to reach out to my office, Representative Tina Orwall. I'm the only Tina in the legislature, so I'm always there to help or connect people to resources or what's going on with legislation.
Great. Yes, there's so many resources out there, and that's a big thing that we want to put out there that Leah also mentioned, is there's this intimidation behind the idea of working with the House of Representatives or anyone who's in power, but we want to break that. We want to make sure that we are having a conversation like we are right now, that we understand that there's accountability that's now happening, and that's what needs to happen. And you mentioned that you want to apologize to survivors and anyone involved, because there's a history of a lot of lack of accountability, and we want that to change. In order for that to change, we need to break that barrier and that intimidation of reaching out to those who can truly help us in legislation and all of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a survivor the other day reach out to me from Ohio. And I don't know how I got on her email chain, and I responded to her. And I actually, because I work with the prosecutor Rick Bell, and Mary and his staff was able to connect, and they called her the same day. So again, you know, we want people to feel heard and supported, and that's what we're here for.
And I've had similar experiences with lawmakers in other states. I've been working with a state senator in Kentucky who's trying to do some work around same nurse access. And so we've been connecting and chatting and working on that. And I also have people in Oregon that I've been working with, a survivor named Jessica, who is absolutely incredible, doing great work with her legislator, Brock Smith. So this movement really is about people connecting with other people. And I'm so excited to work with Representative Orwall and Senator Dingra and Representative Mossbrucker and all of these like real actual women who are just smart people doing good work.
A question for all three of our panelists today, and maybe you as well, Katie. As we close this session, which I mean, we could talk forever. It took us years to get where we're at. So imagine how long it could be to fix the problem. But we're doing what we can one day at a time. But what do we say to students who are now going back to school and college students where we have seen a huge increase of sexual assault on campuses? And I use that loosely because we don't hear about them until people like Brenda Tracy tells her story. We don't hear about them unless there's media involvement. But there are so many cases we get called on constantly where the colleges are tucking the cases under the rug, and nothing is being done except moving the perpetrator to another campus of theirs. How is that solving the issue and allowing the rapist to continue to work or freely attend college? Where's the victim's rights?
Mm-hmm. I'm so glad you raised that. You know, Sophia from Spokane, who's in college down there, has actually been working with all of us on 1109, and she had reached out because she's just had so many of her college friends treated poorly who have had, you know, been sexually assaulted. And so she wanted to make sure that all the officers on campus were trained, and so we worked on that. But I really want to focus more on this. We know the most at-risk population to be sexually assaulted are actually women between the age of 18 and 24, especially on college campuses. So I would also turn to Antoinette, who's been working on anti-SLAP legislation. And I don't know, Antoinette, do you want to talk about that?
Sure, yeah. I think one of the most significant problems that college age victims face is the threat of legal action being taken against them for reporting, for speaking out about an assault. And universities and colleges are also sometimes under threat of lawsuits, but from perpetrators. But you know, sexual assault survivors can be subjected to defamation lawsuits, and they don't have any real protection if they are you know, sued by a perpetrator who may have more resources than them. We Washington State right now is working on expanding our anti-SLAP legislation. And SLAP is it stands for a lawsuit intended to prevent people from participating in the public process. So what the anti-SLAP legislation does is provide protections for survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence from being dragged into court and not having any way to defend themselves against a lawsuit or a potential lawsuit. And Senator Peterson is actually working on this legislation and has been championing this expansion of our anti-SLAP legislation. And hopefully it will pass the legislature this session and provide much needed protections for survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence, so that they can protect themselves if they are faced with a lawsuit from a perpetrator.
Can I also say that we're never going to prosecute our way out of sexual assault. We're never going to incarcerate our way out of sexual assault. This has been a problem that has been occurring since the beginning of time. And the only way that we're going to solve for sexual assault is to prevent it. And one of the best ways to do that is, I'm a teacher with education. And what's amazing is that last year, our legislature in Washington passed comprehensive sexual health education. No work on sexual health education has been done since 2007 in our state. So we worked on that bill, it passed, it was very challenging to get that through the legislature. And then a group tried to turn it over with a referendum. So I got to work on the Approve R90 campaign here in Washington, and we won. We won by 20 points, which shows that sexual health education is not an unpopular or controversial idea. It is overwhelmingly seen as positive. That for the first time, we now know that every student in Washington state is going to learn about consent. And that's how we solve the problem of sexual assault on college campuses, not with expulsion, not with arrests. We solve it with prevention. So hopefully we can keep expanding sexual health education. We can keep expanding consent education and really develop a culture of consent, because culture and laws have to work together in order to make real change. And I'm really enthusiastic about that potential.
Yeah, you said it right, and we have a couple minutes left. So I really want to make sure, Leah, Representative Orwall, Antoinette, if there's anything you would like to talk about or share before we end our time with you all, please do so.
Well, I think I want to end with a thank you. I want to thank all of you and this incredible organization that's been there every step of the way. I want to thank our partnerships that we've had with our law enforcement and our advocacy. But most of all, I want to thank survivors who have made their voices heard, because I do believe that's how change happens. You can't fix the system unless you understand where it failed. And I know we've taken some great steps, and I would just tell everyone out there that, we're going to keep working on it. We have more work to do, but, if you're out there, and want to make your voice heard, please reach out, because we would love to work with you.
And I would just echo that. I would say to people out there, find the lawmaker in your state that is working on similar issues. More and more women are being elected to office. It makes it easier to reach out, find somebody who looks like you, and reach out. That the lawmakers are people and they want to do good work. And that's why they signed up to be public servants. So I just encourage people to reach out to your lawmakers and take that leap if it's safe for you.
Well, thank you so much, Representative Tina Orwall and Leah, for joining us today. And we're concluding No More Week. This is our 8th annual No More Week that we've partnered with the No More Foundation. And this dialogue that we're having, this is the purpose of No More Week, having a global dialogue, but us being able to talk together and to the public really starts that accountability in the conversation, breaking barriers. So I really appreciate your time and everyone who's tuned in. If you have any questions, please do feel free to email info@nwcave.org. Check out the websites that we've mentioned in the chat, the website nwcave.org, wasaysnomore.org. And as Representative Tina Orwall mentioned, you can reach out to her office. And Leah, we appreciate all the advocacy that you've made in your time. It's huge. It's huge. We appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Everybody have a good weekend. Take care.